Just yesterday, GBNews exclusively revealed that we have now seen 5,000 migrants cross the Channel in 2026 alone. And now today, more tragedy has once again struck. Because early today, 4 immigrants have died trying to cross the Channel. And GBNews can exclusively reveal the images on your screen now depicting that very dinghy that the callous people smugglers attempted to cram 116 people onto this morning, leading to an inevitable tragedy. That's the dinghy itself where 4 went overboard and perished. 74 made it on that dinghy to Britain. They simply left the dead behind, and 116 tried to get on. 42 extras were left behind on the beaches of France. Now, all of this comes as it emerges today that the French have rejected Shabana Mahmood's proposal to police the Channel using British Border Force vessels and tow them back to France. Now, the proposal was part of the long-delayed renegotiations of the UK-France migrant deal, which overran last week, forcing a last-minute emergency extension and an extra £16.2 million. They've already given over £700 million to the French, but it's only yielded a 33% interception rate. And don't forget, many of those will simply be craft that fail and are taken back to the shores just to return on the next dinghy. It now seems increasingly clear that there is no political will to solve this problem, but that, of course, means more crossings and inevitably and sadly, even more deaths. Now, Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, has been driving a hard bargain, but is it time for Britain's leaders to wake up and smell le café and say to Monsieur Macron, you can stuff your...
Du pain, du vin, du boursin.
Yes, is it time to put tariffs on everything from France, from champagne to camembert to a simple fresh baguette? Let's now speak with Tony Smith, the former Director General of UK Border Force, who once again joins me on the show. Tony, it's always a pleasure to have your show, and every time I speak with you, it's Groundhog Day. And today, another tragedy in the Channel. Tony Smith, overloaded craft. People smugglers that don't care at all. They simply ploughed on to British shores. That craft itself, a monstrous dinghy of death. What can be done, if anything, to try and stop this terrible invasion?
Well, I think we do need to call out the French, Martin, on a couple of things again. Really allowing drownings to happen in your waters under your nose, and then simply to allow the vessel to continue to the UK, as your pictures showed there. We now have the vessel and we have the witnesses to that crime scene, actually, Martin, and I don't understand why that should be. In my book, that dinghy should have been taken back to France alongside everybody on board to assist the French in having an investigation which might ultimately have been a manslaughter or a murder. We simply don't know that, and I don't quite understand why it is that the French are allowing drownings to happen right under their noses when you can imagine what that would be like if that were happening in our waters, Martin. You and I would be talking about it for years, and there'd be inquiries in Parliament and whatever, and yet it seems to be almost a weekly occurrence. So I'm very worried that the French are allowing this to happen. And then on the other point about the deal, Martin, I did have a look before I came on to look back on this negotiation. Priti Patel went to France with a team in 2021 to make exactly this same offer. Why don't you allow the Border Force vessels to come into your waters and we will bring them back to France for you? And they said no then, and they're still saying no now. So the French attitude hasn't really changed, I'm afraid, very much, Martin, whether or not we've got a Labour government, a Conservative government or a different Home Secretary. I'm afraid their attitude is very much the same, is a very much laissez-faire attitude. We're going to have hands off and allow these crossings to continue.
Tony Smith, if there is that sense of political déjà vu, the French said today this is a sovereign territory issue. They will not allow British vessels into their sovereign waters because it is French. With that in mind, is there any point even continuing to bang our heads against this brick wall? They're clearly saying no. There's no latitude for change, irrespective of political stripes. Shabana Mahmood can try her best, as Priti Patel did. My question is simple. Is it time to defund the French?
Well, Arguably, yes. I think that's why she's trying to drive a hard deal now the contract's run out, Martin. The problem, of course, if we completely withdraw all support to France, then they could simply withdraw completely from the beaches and there will be no patrols whatsoever by anybody, from anybody trying to disembark from that whole stretch of France, and things could arguably get worse. So I think we do need to keep talking to them. But there is an element of hypocrisy here in the EU. I mean, the French have said that this is a matter for the EU, but we know full well that the EU are funding patrols off of Tunisia and Syria and returning people, putting people straight back to those countries without a blink of an eye. Now, those are dangerous countries, and you can have a deal, provided there's no risk of refoulement, you can have a deal between the two neighbouring countries like this. There's no reason at all why the French could not agree with us. And meanwhile, on their southern border, they are doing exactly that in arguably much more dangerous circumstances. So I think there's real problems with the EU and the French position on this. We have to keep talking to them. But you and I said before, Martin, we can't control what they do. Ultimately, we have to control what we do. And that is about stopping the boats and detaining people when they come, changing our legislative framework, and reducing the incentives that which the French, to be fair to them, have said that's what we need to do.
Tony Smith, once again, thank you for your expertise. And I just fear this won't be the last time we have this conversation. It seems that more tragedy in the Channel is simply inevitable. Tony Smith, the former Director General of UK Border Force, thank you very much indeed for your company this evening. I'm delighted now to be joined in the studio in Westminster by my panel, the former Chairman of the Parliamentary Labour Party, Lord Cryer, and the former Conservative Attorney General, Sir Michael Ellis. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Lord Cryer, if I may start with you. You heard there from Tony Smith, history repeating itself. Shabana Mahmood making all the right mood music, the French rejecting it, as Priti Patel did before. It all begs the question, what's the point of repeating the same moves and expecting a different outcome? Let's just stop paying the French.
Well, we could do that. I mean, I don't see any problem. I personally haven't got a problem with doing that. I think it's a bit more than mood music, what Shabana's done today. What Shabana's done is very definite and forceful. And she won't have won herself any friends on the other side of the channel. First, let me just sort of add to that. It's appalling that 4 people have died, and this happens again, and as you said, it happens again and again and again. We have these terrible pictures of bodies being washed up every few months. Do you remember the picture of that small boy who was washed up on the south coast? You've got very, very strong currents and riptides, both sides of the channel. I've swum on both sides. I haven't swum the channel, but I've swum in the waters on both sides. And, I can attest to that. But it might be, we might have, if we really want to stop this, we might have reached the point where we have to say to the French government, we are going to defund the contract. As Tony Smith said, the contract's come to an end. And we may have to say to them, we're not going to fund it any longer until you start to take positive action and stop this happening. But I don't see any alternative to that. But
if that happens, if we defund the French and they simply down tools, things could get much, much worse. And then, if more people perish, they could simply blame the English.
Well, no, what we could do is we could patrol the channel far more effectively. It's not difficult to patrol. It's 20 miles. It's not a huge area that we need to patrol. And I know we'll be talking about the Navy later on, and despite all the fairly sensationalist coverage that we've had in the last few weeks about the Navy, in terms of tonnage, we've got the 7th biggest Navy on the planet. It wouldn't be that difficult to patrol 20 miles of sea.
So, Michael Ellis, let's turn to you now. What can be done about this eternal pickle?
Well, look, Martin, the first thing is people work on the assumption that the French are our allies. I'm afraid this disgraceful example today from the French points out that they're more our adversaries than they are our allies. I don't think they've ever got over their defeat at Waterloo, quite frankly. Look, they've been jealous of the United Kingdom, frankly, since before the United Kingdom even existed. Don't forget, Winston Churchill had to sink half the French fleet when the Nazis invaded France because they'd rather them at the bottom of the ocean than they would be in the Royal Navy, despite the fact that their country had been invaded. They are not supportive. I saw when I was in government, that after Brexit, they did nothing to assist this country to make that work. They did everything they could to obstruct it. And they're motivated to make things harder for this country. That's my genuine belief. And the reality is, de Gaulle tried to even block the UK from entering the European Economic Community way back when. This goes back 200 years. We can't trust the French to do right by the United Kingdom, and they're certainly not doing right by those people who are going in these small boats at perilous risk to themselves, and we've seen more deaths today. And I think people should be infuriated by this, because the French talk about sovereignty, and they're, of course, an incredibly proud government. But the reality is it doesn't take much to protect your own sovereignty from these migrants coming over on boats from France.
So, Michael, what should the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, do next?
Well, the only way we're going to stop these boats is certainly not by relying on the French. The only way this is going to happen, Martin, we've been around this circle 100 times with different governments, different Home Secretaries. The way to do this is to be absolutely emphatic and for a government to have a very strong backbone. You've got to leave the European Court of Human Rights. You've got to repeal the Human Rights Act. You've got to close off avenues of judicial review so the courts can't keep second-guessing government decisions. You've got to exclude this country from various conventions that we've signed up to over the last 80 years that are now being over-interpreted. And you've got to open external centres, like the Australians did, which will disincentivise people from trying to get into these boats in the first place. You've got to do all of those things, and you've got to have the political courage of, Atlantis to actually do that.
Lord Cryer, a long list there of tough actions.
Yeah.
Will this government do any or all of the above?
No, we're not going to leave the ECHR, and I don't think we should. There's a difference between leaving the ECHR and having derogations. And David Blunkett, for instance, who, I'm in the Lords with David, he's a friend of mine. He's talked about having derogations. He's not talked, if you misquoted at the time, he's not talked about leaving altogether. He's talking about having derogation. You can do that, and other countries have done that. I haven't got a problem with that, but I support membership of the ECHR generally, because actually this doesn't get much attention, but there have been cases where British people have been protected because of our membership of the ECHR. I'll give you an example, the case of John Warboys, the black cab rapist. The reason the police were forced to reinvestigate Warboys and then bring him to court, and he subsequently went to prison for a life sentence, was due to the ECHR. Now, that didn't get mentioned, but that's important.
OK, thank you very, very much. We have to leave it there. Lord Cryer, Sir Michael Ellis, thank you very much to my panel. Now,